I can solve it.
Okay, then $300 million is yours.
They said it couldn't be solved. Not by the top engineers at MIT. Not by the world's most celebrated mathematicians. Not even by the supercomputers running calculations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A problem worth $300 million just sitting there, taunting the brilliant minds of our generation. And yet, in a forgotten supply closet at Lincoln Tech Academy, on the edge of Philadelphia, a boy barely 12 years old solved it in under 60 seconds. His father? A night shift janitor earning $11 an hour. His classroom? The hallways his dad mopped every evening. Who was this boy? And why did one of the richest men in America return to find him not once, not twice, but 7 times? Stay with me. Because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about intelligence, opportunity, and where true genius actually comes from. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story begins not in a boardroom or a laboratory, but in the third-floor maintenance closet of a prestigious technology academy where most students come from families who vacation in the Hamptons and drive cars that cost more than some people's homes. It's October 2019, and while America is caught up in election news and streaming wars, something extraordinary is unfolding in a place nobody is paying attention to. Daniel Brooks, 11 years old, sits cross-legged on the concrete floor between industrial mop buckets and boxes of cleaning supplies, his worn notebook open on his lap, pencil moving across the page in calculated strokes. The fluorescent light above him flickers intermittently, casting shadows that dance across equations he's been working on for 3 hours straight. His father, James Brooks, won't finish his shift for another 2 hours, so Daniel does what he always does. He waits, he observes, and he thinks. Most people who pass that closet, if they even noticed it at all, would never imagine that inside, a child was contemplating problems that had stumped professionals with decades of experience and walls full of degrees. Let me take you back 6 years before this moment, to when Daniel was 5 years old and his father first brought him to work because childcare had fallen through. James Brooks had been a janitor at Lincoln Tech Academy for 3 years at that point, a job he took after a factory injury ended his career as a machinist. He was a proud man, the kind who showed up 15 minutes early to every shift and never complained, even when his back ached so badly he could barely stand up straight. That first night Daniel came to work with his father, something unusual happened. While James cleaned the advanced mathematics wing, Daniel wandered into an empty classroom where a professor had left a complex proof on the whiteboard, something about algorithmic optimization theory. The writing was dense, full of Greek symbols and nested functions that would make most adults' eyes glaze over. James found his son 30 minutes later, still standing in front of that board, utterly silent, just staring. "Come on, buddy, we gotta keep moving," James had said gently, placing a hand on his son's small shoulder. Daniel turned to him with those wide, dark eyes and asked a question that James still remembers word for word to this day. "Daddy, why did they make it so complicated when you could just flip the sequence?" James didn't understand what his son meant. He had dropped out of high school to help support his own family and never had the chance to go back. But he saw something in Daniel's face that night, a kind of clarity, a brightness that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. From that point forward, Daniel became a regular fixture in the shadows of Lincoln Tech Academy. He didn't attend classes there, of course. His family couldn't afford the $60,000 annual tuition. He went to public school during the day, a overcrowded building 40 minutes away where teachers were overworked and resources were scarce. But in the evenings, while his father worked, Daniel absorbed everything around him like a sponge soaking up water. He would peek through the small windows of classroom doors watching lectures. He would sit in hallways, listening to study groups debate thermodynamics and computer science. He memorized the rhythms of the building, knew which professors left notes on boards, which classrooms had books he could borrow for an hour before carefully returning them to their exact spots. The security guards grew used to seeing him. "That's just James's kid," they would say. "Smart as a whip, quiet as a mouse." Nobody bothered him. To the wealthy students who actually attended Lincoln Tech, Daniel was invisible, just part of the background like the furniture or the vending machines. And in many ways, that invisibility became his greatest advantage. He could learn without pressure, explore without judgment, think without the weight of expectations crushing down on him. Now, let me introduce you to the other half of this story, Richard Thornton. If you follow tech news or business journals, you've heard that name. 62 years old in 2019, founder and CEO of Titan Dynamics, a company that revolutionized quantum computing and artificial intelligence integration. Thornton wasn't born wealthy. He grew up in Detroit, the son of an auto worker, put himself through community college and then transferred to Stanford where he earned his PhD in applied mathematics. He built his empire through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to accept limitations. By his 50s, he was worth somewhere north of $40 billion, owned properties on 3 continents, and had the kind of influence that made senators return his phone calls within the hour. But for all his success, Richard Thornton had one problem he couldn't solve, one equation that had haunted him for nearly 8 years. It was called the Kronos Algorithm, a mathematical framework that would theoretically allow quantum computers to predict system failures before they happened, essentially giving any network or infrastructure the ability to self-correct and become virtually unhackable. If someone could crack it, they would revolutionize everything from national defense to global financial systems to healthcare networks. Thornton had thrown resources at this problem that most people couldn't even comprehend. He had hired Nobel laureates, assembled teams from Cambridge and Oxford and Tokyo University, built supercomputers specifically designed to brute force test millions of possible solutions. Nothing worked. Every approach hit the same wall. The math simply wouldn't resolve. It was like trying to find a door in a room with no exits. By early 2019, Richard Thornton was frustrated in a way he hadn't been since his 20s. He was a man used to winning, used to bending reality to his will through sheer force of intellect and capital. But the Kronos algorithm remained unsolved, mocking him from whiteboards and digital displays in his private research facility. His team was demoralized. Millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours had produced nothing but dead ends and theoretical impossibilities. In September of that year, during a quarterly shareholder meeting, a young investor had the audacity to ask if maybe, just maybe, the problem was actually unsolvable. Thornton's response was immediate and cutting. "There is no such thing as unsolvable," he said, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "There are only people not smart enough to find the solution." The comment went viral, clipped and shared across social media, turned into memes and hot takes. Some people praised his confidence. Others called him arrogant, out of touch, a billionaire who thought money could buy answers to everything. The criticism stung more than Thornton wanted to admit. So he made a decision that would change multiple lives forever. He would issue a public challenge open to anyone in the world. Solve the Kronos algorithm, and he would personally award $300 million. No restrictions on who could enter. No requirements for degrees or credentials. Just pure problem-solving ability. Winner takes all. The announcement came in October 2019 at a press conference that was live-streamed to millions of viewers. Richard Thornton stood at a podium in his company's main auditorium, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. "I'm making this offer because I believe in human ingenuity," he said, reading from prepared remarks but delivering them with the intensity of a preacher. "Somewhere out there is a mind that can see what we've been missing. Maybe that person is in this room. Maybe they're watching from halfway around the world. It doesn't matter to me if they're 20 or 80, if they have a doctorate or never finished high school. Show me the solution and the money is yours." The media ate it up. Within hours, the story was everywhere. $300 million. The largest intellectual bounty in history. Thousands of people registered for the challenge within the first week. Professional mathematicians, ambitious college students, conspiracy theorists convinced they had cracked the code, even a few celebrities who thought they'd take a shot at it for the publicity. Thornton's team set up a secure online portal where people could submit their solutions. Each submission would be run through a verification system, and if it passed initial screening, a panel of experts would review it personally. Most submissions were eliminated within seconds, obvious nonsense or fundamental misunderstandings of the problem. A few made it to human review, but none came close to actually solving anything. The challenge became a phenomenon, debated on talk shows and podcasts, turned into the setup for late-night comedy jokes. But as weeks turned into months, the initial excitement began to fade. It started to look like maybe the critics had been right. Maybe some problems actually were unsolvable. Now let me bring these two worlds together. It's December 2019, about 8 weeks after the challenge was announced, and Daniel Brooks is sitting in that maintenance closet at Lincoln Tech Academy, doing what he does every evening. His public school has let out for winter break, which means he's been spending even more time at the academy, soaking up everything he can. Earlier that day, one of the graduate-level professors had left a printout of the Kronos algorithm on a desk in an empty lecture hall. Daniel had seen it, recognized it from news coverage he'd watched on his father's phone. He studied it for maybe 20 minutes, then carefully left it exactly where he'd found it, but the equation stayed with him, turning over and over in his mind like a puzzle box he couldn't quite open. Here's something most people don't understand about the way truly gifted minds work. It's not that they're necessarily smarter than everyone else in some broad, general sense. It's that they see patterns where others see chaos. They make connections that seem to come from nowhere but are actually the result of thousands of small observations building on each other until suddenly clarity emerges. For Daniel, math wasn't about memorizing formulas or following steps. It was a language, one he'd been teaching himself to speak fluently since before he could read English properly. That evening in the closet, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and floor wax, he opened his notebook and started writing. Not because he thought he could solve a problem that had stumped some of the world's best minds. He was 11. He didn't have that kind of ego or ambition. He just wanted to understand it, to see if he could make sense of the patterns he'd noticed. What happened over the next 47 minutes would be difficult to believe if we didn't have the documentation to prove it. Daniel worked through the problem with an approach that nobody on Thornton's team had considered because it required ignoring several assumptions that seemed fundamental to how the math was structured. He didn't try to solve the algorithm as it was presented. Instead, he deconstructed it, broke it down to its core components, and then rebuilt it from a different angle entirely, one that treated the temporal variables not as fixed points but as fluid relationships. If you're not a mathematician, that might sound like gibberish, but here's the simple version. Everyone had been trying to force the equation to work within existing frameworks. Daniel asked a different question entirely. What if the framework itself was the problem? By midnight, he had filled 17 pages of his notebook with calculations, corrections, cross-references, and what looked to his untrained hand like something that might actually work. But Daniel had no way to verify it. He didn't have access to the kind of computational tools needed to test this level of mathematics. He couldn't exactly submit it to the official challenge portal. He didn't have a computer at home, and even if he did, he wouldn't know how to navigate the submission process. So he did what seemed logical to him. He tore the pages carefully from his notebook, folded them, and tucked them into his jacket pocket. Maybe he'd show his math teacher after winter break. Maybe she could tell him if he was even close or if he'd just wasted an evening chasing nothing. James Brooks finished his shift at 1 in the morning, exhausted and ready to get his son home and into bed. He found Daniel asleep on a pile of towels in the closet, notebook still open beside him, pencil still in his hand. James felt a complicated mix of emotions looking at his boy. Pride, because Daniel was clearly brilliant in ways James himself could barely comprehend. Guilt, because he couldn't afford to give his son the kind of education and opportunities a mind like that deserved. Fear, because he worried what would happen to a kid that smart growing up in a world that often punished intelligence that came from the wrong zip code. He gently woke Daniel, helped him gather his things, and they walked together through the empty hallways to the parking lot where James's 15-year-old Honda waited. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet, staring out the window at the streetlights sliding past. "You okay, buddy?" James asked. "Yeah, Dad," Daniel said softly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About whether mistakes can actually be the right answer if you're asking the wrong question." James glanced at his son, had no idea what that meant, but smiled anyway. "That sounds pretty deep for midnight." "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "Probably just tired." But he wasn't tired. His mind was still racing, still turning over the implications of what he thought he'd discovered. He just didn't have the words to explain it to his father, and he didn't want to sound foolish by claiming he'd done something important when he probably hadn't. 3 days later, something happened that would crack this story wide open. Dr. Emily Martinez, a professor of advanced mathematics at Lincoln Tech Academy, returned to campus during winter break to prepare materials for the spring semester. She was one of the few faculty members who had actually noticed Daniel over the years, had even spoken to him a few times, impressed by the questions he asked and the obvious hunger for knowledge in his eyes. That afternoon, while organizing her office, she found something unusual. A stack of folded papers tucked into one of her textbooks, pages that didn't belong to her, covered in handwritten equations. At first, she assumed it was a student's work, maybe left behind accidentally. But as she began to read, her confusion turned to shock. She recognized what she was looking at. The Kronos Algorithm. And not just copied out for study. Someone had worked through it, restructured it, solved it. At least it appeared to be solved. Dr. Martinez had followed the challenge, had even attempted it herself before hitting the same walls everyone else encountered. But this approach, this method, it was unlike anything she'd seen in the dozens of published attempts floating around academic circles. It was elegant, almost simple in its logic, which is usually the hallmark of a correct solution to a complex problem. The handwriting was neat but unmistakably young, the kind of careful printing you see from someone who learned to write not that long ago. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and took photographs of every page. She had to know who had written this. She had to know if it actually worked. Dr. Martinez spent the next 6 hours doing something she had never done before. She input the solution into a simulation program, one used by professional mathematicians to test theoretical frameworks. Most solutions to the Kronos algorithm failed within the first few test iterations, producing errors or logical contradictions. This one didn't fail. It didn't produce errors. It ran clean through every verification layer she could throw at it, resolving exactly as predicted, creating the self-correcting quantum framework that the problem was supposed to produce. She checked her work 3 times, convinced she must have made a mistake in the input. But there was no mistake. Whoever had written this had actually done it. They had solved the Kronos algorithm. At 7 in the evening, Dr. Martinez called the head of her department, a 60-year-old mathematician named Dr. Michael Hayes who had been teaching at Lincoln Tech for 30 years. "Michael, I need you to come to my office right now," she said, her voice tight with an emotion between excitement and disbelief. "I think I'm losing my mind or I've just found something impossible." Dr. Hayes arrived 20 minutes later, skeptical and slightly annoyed at being called in during break. Dr. Martinez showed him the papers, walked him through the solution. He sat down heavily in her desk chair, his face going pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "I found it in my office. I don't know who wrote it." "Emily, if this is real, if this actually works, do you understand what this means?" "Yes," she said. "It means someone just earned $300 million and changed the trajectory of computational science." "We need to contact Thornton," Dr. Hayes said. "But first, we need to find out who wrote this." The handwriting analysis didn't take long. Dr. Martinez had a sudden instinct, a memory of a quiet boy with intelligent eyes who was always around the building in the evenings, always watching, always learning. She asked the security office if they could review camera footage from the areas near her office over the past week. It took them 2 hours to find the relevant clip. December 18th at approximately 6:15 in the evening, a young boy, clearly visible on the hallway camera, entering Dr. Martinez's office, looking around nervously, placing something inside a textbook on her shelf, and then leaving quickly. The security guard pulled up the boy's information from their visitor logs. Daniel Brooks, age 11, son of James Brooks, night custodial staff. Dr. Martinez felt tears spring to her eyes. She knew this child. She had spoken to him, encouraged him, but she had never imagined, never suspected he was capable of something like this. The next morning, Dr. Martinez and Dr. Hayes made a call to Titan Dynamics headquarters in San Francisco. Getting through to someone who could actually evaluate what they had took nearly 3 hours of being transferred and explaining and insisting they weren't cranks or pranksters. Finally, they reached a senior researcher on Thornton's team, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Stone who had been working on the Kronos algorithm for 4 years. They sent her the photographs of Daniel's work. There was silence on the line for a long time as Dr. Stone reviewed the images. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Where did you get this?" Dr. Martinez explained the situation. Another long pause. "I need to bring this to Richard immediately. Don't contact anyone else. Don't publish this. We need to verify it through our systems, but if what I'm seeing is correct, this is the real thing." "What do we do about the boy who wrote it?" Dr. Martinez asked. "What's his name?" "Daniel Brooks. He's 11 years old. His father is a janitor here at the academy." Dr. Stone exhaled slowly. "We're going to change his life. That's what we're going to do." Within 18 hours, Richard Thornton himself was on a private jet from San Francisco to Philadelphia, accompanied by 3 of his top researchers. He had personally run Daniel's solution through Titan Dynamics' most advanced verification systems. It had passed every single test. The Kronos algorithm was solved. After 8 years, after millions of dollars and countless dead ends, the answer had come from an 11-year-old boy who didn't even attend formal advanced classes, who learned by watching through windows and reading over people's shoulders. Thornton's emotions were complicated. There was relief, obviously, that the problem was finally solved. There was professional excitement about what this meant for his company and for the field in general. But there was also something else, something that felt uncomfortably like humility. This child, with none of the resources or advantages that Thornton had poured into the problem, had seen what everyone else had missed. It was a profound reminder that intelligence and insight aren't distributed based on wealth or access. Genius can emerge anywhere, in anyone, and if you're not paying attention to the margins, to the quiet corners where unexpected brilliance might be hiding, you'll miss it entirely. The day Thornton arrived in Philadelphia was a Tuesday in early January, the first week back from winter break. James Brooks received a phone call at 11 in the morning from Dr. Martinez, asking if he and Daniel could come to the academy immediately for a meeting. James's first thought was that his son had gotten into trouble, maybe been caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. His stomach twisted with anxiety as he called into his day job at a warehouse where he'd been picking up extra hours and explained he had a family emergency. He picked Daniel up from school, the boy confused and worried by the sudden disruption. They arrived at Lincoln Tech Academy just after noon, and James could tell immediately that something unusual was happening. There were cars in the parking lot that didn't belong there, expensive vehicles with out-of-state plates. Security directed them not to the administrative offices but to the main conference room, a space usually reserved for board meetings and major donor events. When James and Daniel walked through the door, they found themselves facing a room full of people. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Hayes were there, looking excited and nervous. Several people in expensive suits stood near the windows, tablets and laptops open in front of them. And at the head of the table sat a man James recognized from television and magazine covers. Richard Thornton. James's first instinct was to turn around and leave, certain this was some kind of mistake. But Dr. Martinez approached them quickly, placed a gentle hand on James's arm. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Please sit down." Daniel looked up at his father, questions in his eyes, but James had no answers to give. They sat together at the large polished table, father and son, surrounded by people from a world that usually pretended they didn't exist. Richard Thornton stood and the room fell silent. He looked directly at Daniel, his expression unreadable. "Daniel Brooks," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being heard. "Do you know who I am?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. You're Richard Thornton. You made the challenge about the math problem." "That's right," Thornton said. "And did you attempt to solve that problem?" Daniel glanced at his father, then back at Thornton. "I didn't really attempt it, sir. I just sort of worked on it because it was interesting. I didn't think I actually solved it. I probably made mistakes." One of the researchers, Dr. Stone, stepped forward. She was smiling, her eyes bright. "Daniel, you didn't make mistakes. We've run your solution through every verification system we have. You solved the Kronos algorithm. Completely, correctly, elegantly." The room seemed to tilt around James. He reached out to grip the edge of the table, his breathing shallow. "I'm sorry, what?" he managed to say. Thornton's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Brooks, your son did something that teams of the world's leading mathematicians couldn't accomplish in 8 years. He found a solution that's not only correct but revolutionary in its approach. According to the terms of my challenge, that means he's entitled to the full prize. $300 million. The silence that followed was absolute. James felt like he might pass out. Daniel just sat there looking confused and a little scared. "But I'm 11, Daniel said quietly. "I can't win a contest like that. There must be rules." "The only rule," Thornton said, crouching down so he was at eye level with the boy, "is that you had to solve the problem. Everything else is irrelevant. How old you are, where you come from, none of that matters. You did the work. The prize is yours." What would you be thinking if you were sitting in that room? If you were James Brooks, a man who had worked brutally hard every day of his life just to keep the lights on and food on the table, suddenly being told that your child had just secured generational wealth? If you were Daniel, barely beginning to understand the adult world, being told that your curiosity and a few hours with a notebook had changed everything? Take a moment and really think about that. The weight of it. The unreality of it. Over the next 3 hours, lawyers and financial advisors explained the process of transferring and managing the prize money. Since Daniel was a minor, the funds would be placed in a trust managed by his father until Daniel turned 18, with structures in place to ensure the money was protected and invested wisely. James sat through all of it in a daze, occasionally looking at his son as if seeing him for the first time. Daniel mostly stayed quiet, occasionally asking questions that revealed he understood the financial concepts being discussed better than most adults would. At one point, Thornton pulled James aside, away from the lawyers and advisors. "Mr. Brooks," he said, his tone more personal now, less performative. "I want you to know something. I've spent my entire life believing that success comes from opportunity plus intelligence. I thought I understood how the world worked. Your son just taught me that I've been missing something crucial." James didn't know what to say, so he just listened. Intelligence like Daniel's, it's not common. Maybe one in a generation. Maybe less. And the fact that he developed it basically on his own, with no formal resources, no structure, that tells me he's not just smart. He sees the world fundamentally differently. I'd like to help him develop that gift if you'll allow it. What are you suggesting? James asked carefully. A full scholarship to Lincoln Tech Academy starting immediately. Access to any educational resources he needs. Mentorship from the best minds in whatever fields interest him. Not because of the money he just won, but because a mind like his deserves to be nurtured, and I have the means to help with that. James felt emotions rising in his chest that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope, relief, pride so intense it hurt. Why would you do this? He asked, his voice rough. Because 20 years from now, when Daniel is solving problems the rest of us can't even imagine yet, I want to be able to say I helped instead of getting in the way. Thornton extended his hand. James shook it, feeling the calluses on his own palm press against the smooth skin of the billionaire's hand, two different worlds making contact. The story could end here and it would already be remarkable. But there's more, and this is the part that I think reveals the true character of the people involved. The news of Daniel's achievement went public 3 days later. The media response was instant and overwhelming. National news outlets wanted interviews. Talk shows extended invitations. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from genuine celebration to bitter skepticism. Some people questioned whether an 11-year-old could really have solved something so complex, suggesting it must be a publicity stunt or that adults had helped him and were using the child as a front. Others held Daniel up as proof of whatever narrative they wanted to push about education, about class, about intelligence, about America. The scrutiny was intense and often cruel. James and Daniel found themselves suddenly thrust into a spotlight neither of them had wanted or asked for. Here's what impressed me most about how they handled it. James Brooks, who could have easily been overwhelmed or corrupted by sudden wealth, made a decision that revealed his true priorities. He continued working as a janitor at Lincoln Tech Academy. Not because he had to financially, but because he wanted his son to understand that work has dignity regardless of how much it pays, and that money doesn't change your fundamental character. He did move them out of their small apartment into a modest house in a safe neighborhood with good public schools nearby, but he refused the mansion that financial advisors suggested. He set up college funds for his nieces and nephews. He paid off medical debts for extended family members. He established a scholarship program for children of service workers at Lincoln Tech and other private institutions. Kids like Daniel who were smart and curious but locked out of resources by economics. And Daniel himself showed wisdom beyond his years. When reporters asked him how it felt to be rich, he gave an answer that was quoted widely. "I'm not rich," he said. "My family has money now, but that's not the same thing. I'm the same person I was before. I just want to learn things and understand how stuff works." He enrolled at Lincoln Tech Academy but insisted on keeping his old friends from public school, refusing to let his new environment separate him from the community he came from. He struggled with the social adjustment, with classmates who either resented him or wanted to befriend him for the wrong reasons, but he navigated it with a quiet grace that impressed the faculty members who worked with him. Richard Thornton, for his part, did something unexpected as well. He commissioned a comprehensive study examining how many potential high-level mathematical and scientific talents might be going undiscovered in working-class communities due to lack of access and opportunity. The results were staggering. Statistical models suggested that there could be thousands of individuals with profound intellectual gifts who never get identified or developed because they're not in environments where those abilities are recognized and nurtured. Thornton funded a foundation dedicated to finding and supporting these overlooked talents, with James Brooks serving on the advisory board and Daniel, as he got older, becoming increasingly involved in the foundation's work. The Kronos algorithm itself, now fully functional, was implemented across multiple sectors. It revolutionized cybersecurity systems, made power grids more resilient, improved medical diagnostic networks, exactly the kind of broad positive impact that Thornton had envisioned. And every piece of literature about the algorithm, every technical paper and implementation guide, credited Daniel Brooks as the originating mind behind the solution. His name is now permanently embedded in the history of computational mathematics. But here's the question that I think cuts to the heart of why this story matters. How many Daniels are out there right now? How many brilliant minds are mopping floors or stocking shelves or sitting in underfunded classrooms, never getting the chance to show what they're capable of? How many world-changing solutions are locked inside people who will never be asked the right questions or given access to the right tools? The uncomfortable truth is that we live in a world that often conflates opportunity with ability, that assumes if you haven't succeeded by certain metrics, it's because you don't have what it takes, rather than because the game was set up in a way that never gave you a fair chance to play. Daniel's story is extraordinary, yes, but it's also a reminder of how much potential we waste as a society by maintaining systems that gatekeep knowledge and resources. 3 years after solving the Kronos algorithm, when Daniel was 14, he gave a presentation at a technology conference that Thornton had invited him to speak at. I want to share part of what he said because I think it captures something essential. People keep calling me a genius, and maybe by some definitions I am, but I don't think that's the most important part of what happened. The most important part is that I was curious and I had access. My dad gave me access by bringing me to his workplace. The professors at Lincoln Tech gave me access by leaving their doors unlocked and their whiteboards full. Dr. Martinez gave me access by being kind to a kid who had no business being in her academic building. Access is what changed my life, not just intelligence. And if we really want to solve the big problems facing humanity, we need to give more people access to ask questions and explore answers. Not just people who look a certain way or come from certain zip codes or have certain bank account balances. Everybody. Because you never know where the next solution is going to come from. It might come from a laboratory at a prestigious university, or it might come from a maintenance closet in Philadelphia. The applause he received was lengthy and genuine, but more importantly, his words sparked conversations in educational and policy circles that are still ongoing. Several school districts implemented programs to identify and support high-potential students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Technology companies started funding makerspaces and advanced learning resources in communities that had been historically overlooked. It wasn't a complete transformation of the system, these things never are, but it was movement in a direction that mattered. Now, I want to pause and ask you something directly. When you first heard about this story about a janitor's son solving a problem worth $300 million, what was your initial reaction? Did you believe it immediately or were you skeptical? Did it inspire you or did it make you think about opportunities you might have missed in your own life? There's no wrong answer here. I'm genuinely curious because the way we react to stories like this reveals something about our own beliefs about potential and possibility. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them and I'm fascinated by the different perspectives people bring. And here's another question, maybe a harder one. If you had the power that Richard Thornton had, the wealth and influence to create opportunities for overlooked talents, would you do it? Or would you protect your resources, argue that people need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, maintain the systems that benefited you? Again, there's no judgment here. These are complicated questions about responsibility and fairness and how society should function. But they're worth thinking about. Let me bring you to where Daniel and James are now because I think you'll want to know. As of the time I'm telling you this story, Daniel is 16 years old. He graduated from Lincoln Tech Academy 2 years early and is currently attending MIT, pursuing a double major in mathematics and philosophy. He's still quiet, still more comfortable with equations than with crowds, but he's found a community of people who appreciate his mind and respect his character. He spends his summers working with his father's foundation, traveling to schools and community centers, talking with young people who remind him of who he was just a few years ago. James Brooks is 52 now. He stopped working as a janitor 2 years after Daniel won the prize, not because he looked down on the work but because his time became consumed with managing the Scholarship Foundation and speaking to groups about parenting and supporting children's education regardless of economic circumstances. He's become an unlikely advocate for working-class families, someone who can speak from experience about the challenges of raising kids when money is tight and opportunities are scarce. He's still the same humble, hard-working man he always was, but now he has a platform to make his voice heard. Richard Thornton, now in his mid-60s, has said in multiple interviews that meeting Daniel Brooks changed his perspective on almost everything. He's become significantly more philanthropic, more focused on legacy beyond just business success. He and Daniel maintain a mentorship relationship, speaking regularly, with Thornton often seeking Daniel's perspective on problems his company is trying to solve. The dynamic between them is fascinating, a genuine mutual respect that crosses generations and backgrounds. The $300 million, invested wisely and managed carefully, has grown substantially. Daniel is set for life financially, as are his future children and grandchildren. But more importantly, the scholarship fund that James established has now supported over 200 students, young people from working-class backgrounds who showed academic promise but lacked resources. Several of them have gone on to top universities. A few have already published significant research in their fields. The ripple effect of one 11-year-old boy's curiosity continues to expand outward, touching lives in ways that are still unfolding. I think about this story often, especially when I'm tempted to make assumptions about people based on surface-level information. It's so easy to look at someone's job title or their address or the car they drive and think you know what they're capable of, what they have to offer. Daniel's story demolishes those assumptions. It reminds us that brilliance doesn't announce itself with credentials and pedigree. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's sitting in a maintenance closet, working through problems just for the love of understanding them. And if we're paying attention, if we're willing to look beyond our preconceptions, we might just discover something extraordinary. There's also something powerful about the way this story challenges our narratives about success. We love the idea of meritocracy, the belief that talent and hard work automatically rise to the top. But Daniel's story reveals how much luck and access factor into who gets to display their talents. He was brilliant, yes, but he was also fortunate. Fortunate that his father worked at a place where advanced learning was happening. Fortunate that security guards and professors tolerated his presence. Fortunate that Dr. Martinez found his work and took it seriously instead of dismissing it. Fortunate that Thornton had made his challenge public instead of keeping it within elite academic circles. Take away any one of those elements and Daniel might have remained invisible, his potential unfulfilled, his gifts unrecognized. So what do we do with that reality? I think the answer is that we build more pathways, create more access points, stay curious about the people around us who might be carrying capabilities we haven't noticed. We fund libraries and community centers and scholarship programs. We listen when young people ask questions instead of dismissing them for lacking formal knowledge. We create challenges and opportunities that are genuinely open to everyone, not just people who already have connections and resources. We remember that the next person who changes the world might currently be doing work we undervalue, living in a neighborhood we ignore, speaking with an accent we condescend to. And we adjust our systems accordingly. Before we close, I want to come back to that maintenance closet at Lincoln Tech Academy, the place where this whole story pivoted. The school has preserved it, actually. They've turned it into a small museum space, kept some of the original cleaning supplies and equipment, mounted photographs and news articles on the walls, and displayed a replica of Daniel's original notebook pages behind glass. Students at the academy now visit it as part of their orientation, a reminder that genius can emerge from anywhere, that the person you overlook today might be the person who solves tomorrow's impossible problem. There's a plaque by the door with a quote from Daniel. Great ideas don't need great rooms. They just need curious minds and the freedom to explore. I think about James Brooks walking those hallways for years, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, never imagining that he was providing his son with something more valuable than any expensive private education could offer. Exposure. The chance to be curious in an environment rich with knowledge. He gave Daniel the gift of proximity to learning, and Daniel did the rest. That's the part of this story that moves me most deeply, I think. James didn't solve the Kronos algorithm. He didn't understand the mathematics. He couldn't explain quantum computing or temporal variables. But he was exactly the father Daniel needed. He provided stability, encouragement, and access. He worked hard to keep his son safe and fed and sheltered. He brought him along to work when he had no other options, and in doing so, accidentally created the circumstances for brilliance to emerge. Sometimes the most important contribution isn't the solution itself, but the creation of conditions where solutions become possible. James Brooks deserves just as much recognition as his son, in my opinion, because without him, none of this happens. He's a reminder that parenting and support work matter, that the people who create environments and opportunities are just as vital as the people who ultimately achieve within those environments. As this story spread around the world, one of the most common responses was from other working-class parents who saw themselves in James, who were doing their best with limited resources, who wondered if their own children might have hidden talents that would never be discovered because the right circumstances wouldn't align. That collective recognition, that shared experience, it speaks to something universal about the relationship between potential and opportunity. We all know, on some level, that the current system leaves enormous amounts of human potential untapped. We all know people who are smarter than their circumstances allow them to demonstrate, who could have been or done remarkable things if the pieces had fallen differently. What Daniel's story offers isn't just inspiration, though it is certainly inspiring. It offers a challenge. It asks us what we're willing to do differently, how we might restructure our institutions and assumptions to catch more of that falling potential before it hits the ground and shatters. It's been 5 years now since an 11-year-old boy solved a problem that had stumped the world's experts, and in that time the question has shifted from, how did he do it? To, how do we find and nurture the next Daniel, and the one after that, and the one after that? The answers are complicated and require resources and political will and cultural shifts that don't happen overnight. But the fact that the question is being asked seriously, in boardrooms and classrooms and legislative chambers, that represents progress. That represents the possibility of a future where brilliance gets recognized and developed regardless of where it originates. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most valuable solution that Daniel Brooks provided. Not the Kronos algorithm itself, as revolutionary as that was, but the undeniable proof that genius is distributed far more broadly than opportunity, and that we have a moral obligation to address that imbalance. So here's my final question for you, and I really want you to think about this one. What potential are you carrying that hasn't been fully realized yet? What could you accomplish if you had access to the right resources, the right mentorship, the right opportunity to explore your curiosity? And flip that around. Whose potential could you help unlock? What access could you provide? What door could you open? What encouragement could you offer that might make all the difference for someone else? You don't have to be a billionaire like Richard Thornton to make an impact. You don't have to solve impossible mathematical equations like Daniel Brooks. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is what James Brooks did. Show up. Work hard. Bring people along with you when you can. Create small spaces where curiosity is allowed to flourish. Pay attention to the people everyone else overlooks. Be willing to be surprised by where brilliance appears. Because here's the truth that this story teaches us. The next great solution to humanity's problems might be forming right now in the mind of someone who looks nothing like what we expect genius to look like. They might be young or old, rich or poor, credentialed or self-taught. They might be working in a job we consider menial, living in a place we consider unremarkable, speaking in a voice we consider unimportant. But they're there. They're thinking. They're seeing patterns and making connections and asking questions. And the only thing standing between them and changing the world might be access. Might be someone taking them seriously. Might be a door left unlocked or a kind word from a professor or a parent who brings them along to work because there's nowhere else for them to be. That's not a fairy tale. That's exactly what happened in a maintenance closet in Philadelphia in December 2019. And it can happen again anywhere, anytime if we're paying attention. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about potential and opportunity and the people around you, do me a favor. Share it. Talk about it. Let it change how you interact with the world, even in small ways. And drop a comment telling me what stood out to you most. Was it Daniel's brilliance? James's quiet strength? Thornton's willingness to be humbled and changed? Or was it something else entirely, some detail or moment that resonated with your own experience? I want to hear from you because stories like this, they're not just about the people involved. They're about all of us, about the kind of world we want to build together, about whether we're willing to see and support the potential that exists in unexpected places. Thank you for staying with me through this whole journey. If you're new here and you found value in this story, hit that subscribe button. We bring you real stories about real people doing extraordinary things, often in ordinary circumstances. Stories that remind us what's possible when curiosity meets opportunity, when hard work meets recognition, when the world bothers to pay attention to the margins where brilliance might be quietly waiting. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and remember that the person who changes your life or changes the world might be someone you've been walking past every single day without really seeing them. Pay attention. You never know what you might discover.